Hello, can everybody hear me? All right, great. So we'll be starting in just about 5 minutes, but if you want to start introducing yourself over in the chat box, which is over on the right-hand side of your screen, there's a little bubble that has three dots in it. So if you want to tell us who you are and where you are tuning in from, that would be great. And we will get started in about 5 minutes. Hi, welcome everybody. We have just about 1 more minute before we're going to officially get started, but if you want to let us know in the chat box who you are and where you're from, that would be great. The chat box is over on the right-hand side of your screen. It's the little bubble with three dots in it, so make your way over there and say hi to us, and we'll be getting started in just about another minute here. All right. Well, we are right at our start time, so I'm going to go ahead and get started with this webinar, Scaling Best Practices to Fit Your Organization. This is the first webinar for our Regional Heritage Stewardship Program in the Intermountain West region, which I'll tell you more about in a minute. I see lots of people finding their way over to the chat box to saying hello, to say hello to us and let us know where they are calling in from. We also wanted to get, since we are talking about scaling, we did want to get to know you a little bit more and wanted to know a little bit about the budget of your institution. So I put a poll up on over in that same area to kind of let us know where you fall in the budget range. So go ahead and fill out that poll. And while you're doing that, I'm going to go ahead and introduce who you're hearing today. So my name is Samantha Forsko. I'm the preservation specialist at the Conservation Center for Art and Historic Artifacts located in Philadelphia. In my job, I work a lot sort of one-on-one with institutions, helping them to do just what we're going to talk about in this webinar, scale best practices to make sure that their organizations are still able to achieve a lot of the things that they might dream about sometimes. And mostly, of course, focused on preservation practices, but a lot of things we'll talk about will be sort of broadly applicable as well. And I am joined today by Jennifer Ortiz. Hi, Jen. You want to introduce yourself to us?
Yeah. Hi, everyone. I hope you can all hear me. Welcome. Thanks for joining us today. My name is Jennifer Ortiz, and I'm the Museum Services Manager with the Utah Division of Arts and Museums. We are the statewide cultural entity for the state of Utah, and our office serves over 250 museums across the state through field services. So workshops, professional development, grant giving, you name it, we sort of do it. So I'm super excited to be here presenting with Samantha today.
Great. And I'm going to end the poll. It looks like we have people sort of at mostly people at both ends of the spectrum, or really little and really big. So that'll be great for this the scaling conversation. So great. I'm going to real quick tell you all a little bit about this Regional Heritage Stewardship Program before we get into the webinar itself. This program is funded by the National Endowment for the Humanities, NEH, and I'm sure most of you know, NEH was founded in 1965, an independent federal agency, and it funds education, research, public programs in the humanities, and it awards grants in lots of categories, including challenge grants, preservation education, and training grants, such as this grant, and digital projects for the public grants. So at the end of 2016, the organization that I work for, CCAHA, was awarded a grant to support our preservation field services program throughout the years of 2017 and 2018. And the bulk of this program we set aside to do a regional collection stewardship program. And we've been calling this program sort of as a whole the Regional Heritage Stewardship Program, which isn't a great acronym, I gotta say, but RHSP will have to do. So in the past, this is sort of based on some success we'd had in the past here in the Philadelphia area, more locally, sort of building upon having this sort of regional cohort of people interested in stewardship of their collection and providing programming to that area. So we set out to see if we could sort of take that program kind of on the road a little bit to some of the areas of the country that have been sort of underserved in this area by adapting this model. So in 2017 and 2018, that iteration of the program, we piloted this RHSP model in the Deep South, which includes the states of Alabama, Mississippi, and Florida, and Appalachia, including the states of Kentucky, West Virginia, and then parts of Ohio and Pennsylvania. In this newest version, we actually got we got a continuation of the grant at the beginning of 2019. So we were able to expand to include the Intermountain West region, which includes the states of Nevada, Utah, and then parts of Idaho, Arizona, and Idaho, Arizona, Colorado, and New Mexico. It's a lot of states, so excuse me there. So that's kind of the summary of this program. If you are not in one of those areas, that is totally okay. You are welcome to join us. Anyway, we're gearing a lot of the program to that area, and we'll be doing some in-person things in that area as well. But we are happy to have everybody here. And we're really lucky this round because we have some really great partners on the ground. The Utah Division of Arts and Museums and Utah Humanities. Jen, can you tell us a little more about those agencies?
Yeah, so the Utah Division of Arts and Museums, as I've mentioned, is our state cultural agency, which houses the Office of Museum Services, which I run. We provide field services, again, to our state's museums and cultural entities. Super happy to be a partner on the ground here in Utah. And then Utah Humanities is our state's humanities council and offers humanities-based programming across the state, which also includes our Utah-based museums through workshops and other types of humanities programming. And just quickly to answer Emily's question, this platform is new. So if you haven't used Webinar Jam before, you do get to see the results of the poll. You'll just have to click down. So underneath the chat box, little 3 dots, there's a little bar, a graph bar, and in there you'll see the poll information. So when we have polls in the future, that's where you'll get to see the results.
Good question, though, Emily. Thanks. And I do have to say, we're really excited to have this great local connection with Jen and her organizations out there, because CCAHA, we are located all the way in Philadelphia, which is pretty far away. I actually grew up on the West Coast, so I feel pretty at home out there, but it's nice to have the local connections over there. And just a little bit about CCAHA for some of you who might be new. It's the Conservation Center for Art and Historic Artifacts, another not great acronym, but we are a nonprofit conservation facility specializing in the treatment of works on paper, photographs, and books through conservation and state-of-the-art digital imaging services. Aside from the conservation work that we do, we've expanded to offer a variety of other services such as fellowship opportunities, fundraising support, disaster assistance, just to name a few. The department I work for, which is the Preservation Services Office, is the outreach and education arm of the organization. So you will see me out on the road presenting educational programs at conferences, things like that. Also working, as I mentioned before, one-on-one with institutions to conduct assessments and assist in the development of many institutional plans, including collections management policies, preservation plans, emergency plans, and more. We serve nonprofit cultural institutions, private individuals, and other collecting organizations, both in our home state of Pennsylvania, but also around the country. We're particularly interested in making sure that all types of organizations all across the country have access to preservation resources, so we can be taking care of our nation's most prized cultural treasures, which is why we're so excited to be out on the West a little bit more for this time around. So, and then just to briefly tell you what's coming with this the Regional Heritage Stewardship Program, we will be doing in-person workshops throughout the region, those states that I mentioned, throughout the course of the next, I guess, a year and a half now is left to it. So that will just be in that region, unfortunately, for you guys who might be elsewhere. We just completed the first round last month, so hoping we got to see some of you in person then. And if not, we'll be coming back in October with some more in-person opportunities. More on that in a minute. We're trying to spread out the locations as much as possible. We also are repeating workshops, so hopefully everyone will kind of have an opportunity to attend an in-person workshop relatively nearby if you're in the region. And then during the months that we're not in the region, we are doing these webinars on kind of a variety of topics to supplement the material from the workshops. And again, those are open to anybody. They will be sort of more tailored to the region, but of course you're still welcome to join. And then finally, in the end, we will be wrapping everything up with a final conference. Just some things to mark your calendars for. These are the upcoming webinars that will be around, and registration is up for, I think, the fundraising for collections one. I'm not sure if the rest of them are, but you can definitely check out that link to see what is kind of coming, and you can mark your calendars, and we'll let you know when the registration is open for the other ones. And again, the in-person workshops are coming up as well in October 14th through 18th. I see a typo down there with the St. George one that's supposed to say 17 and 18, but get the gist. So I will be back. Jen and I will be driving through the state with Emily, I believe, to come visit you guys, and then to mark your calendar for more things coming down the pike. So with that, let's go ahead and get on to today's webinar.
Yes, so thank you, Sam, for that introduction. And let's definitely get started. So scaling best practices. This is all about scaling and the theory of scaling. It's so important for all of our organizations, particularly for our smallest museums. Based on our poll, we have a pretty wide spread of folks joining us today. So with that in mind, at either end of the spectrum, we acknowledge that best practices is a spectrum, and we want to first and foremost acknowledge that while we want to achieve best practices in all scenarios, that it may take our organizations a more measured approach and one that's systematic towards scaling either an idea or a program or a system to our own museum. So that's what we're really going to be focusing on today. And scaling goes both ways. So for those in larger institutions that are joining us, you'll definitely walk away with ways to scale ideas up. Small museums have amazing ideas that can be scaled up to larger institutions. So just keep that in mind as we go through the theory of scaling.
Great. So here are the things we're going to try to cover today. And it's important to know that this is not really an exact science, right? There's no one answer, no, right or wrong. There might be several ways to scale something, and no one way is necessarily better than another way. It's very dependent on your specific institution and your specific needs. So what we're hoping to do today is to give you some tools to be able to think about scaling in a logical way, to approach it in a, systematic fashion, to help you sort of work through the process of deciding what might be best for your institution. So we have a bunch of downloads for you today. I did just post a sticky message of a Dropbox link where you can get some of them, and I'm also going to attempt to push them. As Jen mentioned, this is new webinar software, so we're getting we're trying to figure out how we're doing with it. But I did just share with you a scaling worksheet as well. So check that out there. And I will also, you can also find that in the Dropbox links. There's a scaling worksheet, and the other really helpful one is the 6 steps to scaling. So please take a minute and download those. I think they're really helpful to look at that as we talk through this process a little bit and actually work through some examples. It will be quite helpful. So I think you can either go to the Dropbox link at the top, or you might have to go down. There's a little page icon that has a little dog-eared corner, and I believe the file is available for you to download there, the scaling worksheet. So let's talk quickly about what scalability is. Scaling, as you see on the screen, is adapting successful policies, programs, and projects from different places in ways that work for you and your organization. I know a lot of you probably visit other institutions and think, wow, this is such a great exhibit, or this is such an awesome storeroom, or look at how they've managed to organize it, or some other kind of big idea, and wonder how you can make that happen back at your institution. And we usually do think of this as going from the big to the little, scaling something down to work at a smaller institution, but you can also do this in the reverse. Ideas can be scaled up, as Jen mentioned earlier. You might be seeing something done at a small institution and think, wow, we can definitely do that, and take it a step further, expand it. So that's another part of scaling up. Things can be scaled down or up depending on the appropriateness for your situation, your institution, all those other sort of factors. So when you have an idea, one of the first questions you need to ask yourself when you start to think through this is something actually scalable? Is it worth scaling? And here are some of the things you might want to consider. Is it from a reputable organization? Is this something that, has a history of doing good things, has a history of research that has moved the field forward? You definitely want to think about the source material. Has happened or is proven to have good results. So you don't want to see something that another institution is struggling with and then try to scale that for yours. If they're already struggling, it might not be appropriate. You want to make sure it meets a need. You don't just want to do something just because. You want to make sure that it's actually for a purpose. Implements a best practice. It's kind of the whole topic of this, right? We want to make sure we're being good stewards of our collection. And it's simple, easy to implement. We don't want to have to make things too difficult for ourselves in this. Relevance to your mission, of course, is important for everything, so we want to do that. And making sure it's testable, reversible, you can walk it back if you need. That's definitely a principle we take very seriously in the field of conservation. We want everything to be reversible because we don't know what might be better in the future. So want to make sure that also applies here as well. So the process of scaling, we've determined if something can be scaled or should be scaled, and now we're going to think about it in these 3 steps. And I put together these the 3 steps, or the 6 steps document, which you can download in that file, and I also just shared it again, so you can check out the process of scaling in 6 different steps. So this will be really helpful as we work through different sort of examples and help to sort of jog your brain, make you think about how you're going to get things done when you're trying to scale things yourself. So you might want to download that and have that there. So don't have to worry about necessarily writing all of these down. We are going to walk through them. But these are our 6 steps to scale.
So we're going to just walk you guys through these 6 steps together. The first is, as Sam has already mentioned, identify what it is that you want to scale. What is the source? Is it reputable? And then consider your own organization. Is it scalable? Is it something that is a program that you can take wholesale and work for your institution? Think about what your organization would need for scaling. And then establish why you want to scale it for your organization. I think this point is particularly important in the process of scaling, and an important part of the conversation that your museum should be having. What purpose does it serve? Is it tying back to your museum's mission? Do you actually need this, or is it sort of a shiny, sexy object, which of course we all love and all of our organizations pursue, but is it going to make that desired outcome or impact happen? Identifying that in advance before a scaling is critically important to your organization.
And then after you've done that, you're going to steps 3 and 4 here. You want to, in step 3, really break it down into what are the elements, what are the important details to this in its little parts and little details, so you can sort of take it in bite-sized chunks. I do this a lot with preservation planning. Is something I talk about, is taking things in bite-sized chunks. So really just looking at what those little pieces are that make the best practice. You also want to think about how it was made, created, and developed. That goes a little bit back into, is this something you even want to scale? How are all of these pieces kind of functioning together? And how does it function as a whole? So after you've really broken down each of those parts and look at them individually, you can then move on to step 4 and determine, what are the pieces that you can use? What's going to work best for your audience? What's going to work best for your organization? Is there anything you can improve upon? Remember the scaling up, right? You can either take this little chunk and do it just how it was, or maybe that's where you take another step. And of course, when you're evaluating each of these little chunks, you want to consider your resources and your audience kind of for every step along the way, to make sure that this is still going to be relevant and you're still able to do it with the resources you have available.
So steps 5 and 6, of course, you're going to want to think about the parts that you don't need for your museum. So what parts are beyond your capabilities in terms of resources? So that considers all resources, right? Including your budget, your staff, and just general capacity at your organization. And then thinking about your audience, again, coming back to who you're serving. Parts of an idea or a program or a process might not be relevant to your organization. People know if you've taken an idea wholesale and just taken it from one organization and implemented it into your own. We all like to borrow and be inspired from others, but it's really important to remember who your audience is in that process. And then part 6, laying out a plan for what you will do to make it happen. So really having the conversation of what are the next steps to make this happen. Again, thinking about everything that we've already talked about, your capacity, your resources, staffing, who your audience is, and what sort of resources do you need to move things forward. Refining that idea or that project to fit your organization, that's the part that's going to make, of course, what you're trying to scale happen.
So that all sounds super easy, right? Done and done. I know it's not as easy as that it sounds in theory, but let's actually go through some together because I think that will really help everything sort of come together in a more practical sense. So our example that we're going to kind of walk through with you is this best practice, which I'm sure you guys all know this one. You've heard it a million times. I know it's something a lot of smaller institutions really struggle with. In fact, I often hear people say, I can't control the HVAC system to keep things in range, so why even bother? No monitoring, no supplementary controls, nothing, because they think it's a lost cause. And that is not the case, right? We just need to scale the best practice to fit the organization. And there's plenty you can do to reach towards this. So first off, we're going to ask our first question. The best practice is temperature and humidity in a controlled range. Is this something worth scaling? I think probably the answer is a resounding yes, right? Everybody knows about this one. Definitely something that we at least want to be moving towards doing. So since we definitely want to do this, let's kind of work through the steps, our 6 steps, and you might also look at that worksheet as well, which I know also presents it in a different way, but look at those 2 things and we'll work through the process in 6 steps.
So starting with number 1, you're identifying what it is that you would like to scale. So we're talking about an environmental management program that keeps temperature and relative humidity within that specified range. So the source that we're looking at, is it reputable? This is a best practice recommendation from AIC. This is something we know we should be doing. So we're going to take that as yes, it is a reputable source. And is this scalable? We can try many different ways to control the environment and change them if they don't work. So it's reversible and yes, scalable. So we're going to take that information and think about why we want to scale it for our organization. It might seem like a no-brainer. This is pretty straightforward, but we want to make sure that we're being good stewards of our collection and thinking about long-term preservation of our objects. So the purpose that it's serving is it's reducing those fluctuations, the fluctuations that cause the most damage across a collection, and hopefully improve conditions overall for our collections. The desired outcome and impact are that our artifacts will be stored in an environment that promotes their long-term preservation. So they'll last longer. We'll get to share them with future generations. That's really the goal. And it obviously does meet our mission as museums. We want to keep our collection. So that's what it'll do for our organization.
And then in our next steps, as I talked about before, we're going to break it down into those little bits and pieces, those little parts. So there is a defined environmental ranges that are key to this best practice. And we know what those ranges are. The temperature range is generally between 68 and 72 degrees. The relative humidity is generally between 45% and 55% RH. And the other sort of component to that is knowing those ranges, but then having a way to measure those ranges. That's sort of the pieces, right? Where we have these ranges, that's sort of one piece of it, but being able to know what they are, where we're at, is sort of the other piece of it. So how were these created? The ranges were developed by the conservation community as a way to sort of have the best proven result for long-term preservation. And the other part of that, the kind of measuring of it, helps with the function. A monitoring system in place to measure the temperature in RH will help to ensure that you're meeting those bits and pieces. So what are the parts that you can adapt with that? We can purchase and install cheap data loggers so we can begin consistently monitoring what our HVAC system is capable of. So the way I came to that was, I know what my ranges are. I'm not sure if I'm going to be able to reach those ranges, but the way I can start to kind of work towards that is by knowing what the situation is. So you might want to consider some of those other things I've listed there, what's going to work best for your organization. If we, say, have a small staff and monitoring has to be really easy, not take up much time, and we don't have a facility staff to consistently troubleshoot, we want to make sure we're doing something cheap and easy with those data loggers, right? I have that other thing. Remember, if I'm kind of looking at this as if we were a small institution, but I know we have several larger institutions on the webinar as well, so they could be thinking about ways that they could scale this up. And then also, again, you want to consider those resources. What do you actually have? We have a small budget for data loggers. We have things like fans. We have dehumidifiers. We might not have that full-blown HVAC system, but here are the things we do have. So we're breaking it down and seeing how those pieces can go together, determining what we can use.
So we might be able to control the environment with our fans and dehumidifiers, but probably not with our HVAC. So we have an old system that might not be able to be capable of staying within the range. So that's some of the things that we're acknowledging. Again, best practices on a spectrum. That's where we're at. And so we need to create a plan for how we will actually make it happen. We want to use the data that we're collecting from data loggers to determine the best time to maybe turn on and off the fans or the dehumidifiers, and then in turn use that data to advocate for a better system in the future, potentially. So we're going to go ahead and scale this best practice idea down to make it work for us. I think we have a comparison chart of different data loggers, Sam.
Yes, we do.
Yeah.
I will share that in the file share, but okay. You can also find it in the Dropbox, but I'll share it right now.
Just so you can see how you might be able to purchase some that are easy to download data from and are affordable. There are really affordable data loggers out there nowadays. Put them in spaces and begin monitoring. This is an example, but this is something that Sam and I and our teams are, the people we work with see every day in their museums. So we know that people can scale this idea very easily up and down. As we're monitoring, we might be able to see, where are the high points in relative humidity and how we can sort of mitigate that through the use of fans or low humidity for us here in Utah and in the Intermountain West in general, using dehumidifiers as on a case-by-case basis. So with the data loggers, we've been able to collect some data and then in turn really advocate for the collection either through an improved or new HVAC system, or again, if that's not even possible within a historic structure, just making sure that the people who need to be aware of those things, if you're in a city museum, city managers, for instance, are aware of some of the issues that your building has. So we want to take this opportunity and turn it back to you guys about, does anyone have any suggestions on how we might scale this idea up? Because we know we have some larger institutions with us as well. If we had all of the money and resources in the world, what could we do? We're talking about scaling down, but pie in the sky, what would you do if you had all of the money and resources? Are there any suggestions? Please use the chat box.
Yeah, so while you guys are using the chat box to do that, I'm going to just speak a little bit about some other things you can do with scaling down, but please tell us about scaling up over in the chat box. What your big idea, this is the time to dream big. So go for it. But you might find just by doing this, checking out the environmental situation, you might have some areas that are actually better controlled than you thought. Some areas might just be naturally within that temperature range, and you would be missing out on it if you didn't have something like those data loggers in place to check out where you are at. And I don't see any ideas coming out of you guys for the scaling up, so I will share some of them. Oh, there's some. Individually, yes, perfect. Individually controlled rooms, exactly. Even individual objects, right? Perfect storage facility from scratch. What a dream. Yeah, you can set that specific temperatures in different galleries instead of a blanket. That's also great. You could also do things like look into cold storage, right? If you really had all the resources, maybe you could have one room that's just for your photographs, air purifiers and dehumidifiers. Great. Yeah. Good ideas. Awesome. All right.
Thank you.
So, yeah, those are all great. So we're gonna throw it over to you guys a little bit more here now with getting your thinking caps on and your fingers limbered up for helping us to think about some of these best practices, how we can scale them both up and down. So we're going to go through some examples and we'll see if you guys can help us think of what some of that scaling might be. Remember to look at those worksheets and kind of think through the things that we've talked about, the bits and pieces and all of that. So I'm going to kind of tell you a little bit about this best practice, but your prompt is what is your ideas for scaling down this best practice. And please let us know on the side. I'll kind of talk through this a little bit, telling us why it's a good best practice and why we need to scale it. But let us know what you think about scaling down this idea. So the first one I wanted to tackle was having an emergency preparedness plan. This is one of my favorite topics. I really like disasters, so I like to think about this one a lot. Let's kind of go through, is this worth scaling, right? What are we actually trying to get at with this best practice? Ultimately, we want to be prepared in the event of an emergency. What is this best practice from? Well, this is definitely a big one from AAM accreditation. It's one of those 5 core documents that you need for accreditation. So you've probably seen a lot of examples about this and know why it's important. From that perspective, but you probably also have seen a lot of examples of disasters where things have gone really wrong because they haven't had a plan. So you could also think of it that way. We don't want a bad thing to happen. What purpose does it serve? We want to make sure that there's kind of a coordinated and good response. Best way to do that is a plan, right? What are some important details of this? I've listed a lot of the sort of most important details on the slide, but just to go over some of the highlights, breaking it down into those bits and pieces again, the plan should be all hazards. It should address the needs of staff, visitors, and collections, very important. Assign responsibilities, have contact information, details about how to protect, evacuate, and recover collections and people. So what are your ideas?
So we have some good suggestions so far. So checking from Christine, checking out FEMA for disaster plan templates if you're starting from scratch, if you have nothing. Definitely looking at the templates that are out there already is a great place to start. Samantha says, have a policy that only covers a specific type of emergency that your region would experience, i.e. if you live in Tornado Alley, only having a tornado plan, not flood, etc. Yeah, that's a great place to start, right? Remembering and knowing what kind of natural disasters you could experience in your region is a wonderful place to start.
Kelly, we're looking at the responses in the chat box. So there's over on the right-hand side of your screen, there's a little like word bubble with 3 dots in it. So click over there and you can see where people are typing their responses to this question. But yeah, those are all really good ideas. Here were some of the ones that we sort of thought of while we were brainstorming this, which you guys actually kind of got on those a little bit. Start with a pocket response plan, which is just a little sort of along the same lines that Christine was saying. You don't have to start from scratch. You don't have to reinvent the wheel. You can use some templates that are out there. Participating with free local events hosted by your local Office of Emergency Management or Emergency Management Agency. Yeah, the prep is really great. I'm with you on that, Christine. And then you could also do things like purchase ready-made supply kits, right? So some of those things don't, get the full, you have your full emergency plan just because you have a response kit. That's not the same thing, but you are working towards that overall goal, one of those pieces of it, which is you want to be ready, right? And having a supply kit definitely makes you ready. So you're getting to one part of it. You might not be getting to the full thing, but you're getting to certain parts of it. So yeah.
Tiffany says that they follow their county's EPP. I'm assuming that's your emergency plan, your county's emergency plan, and working with your fire stations and police officers. So yes, inviting your local officials into your museum, following what you have within either your municipal agency. So whether that's a city, county, whatever that might be, that would be that second part, participating in your free local events hosted through your Office of Emergency Management agency. So that's a great idea. Travis had on the ground experience through Hurricane Florence. They wrote down the steps that they took on the fly before, during, and after the hurricane. That is definitely...
I love that.
Yeah, that's
great.
Trial. Is that trial by fire? Yes,
yeah,
absolutely. It's and not complete, but it's a start, and it's a good start, right? Because you're documenting as you go along, and that's what a lot of us have to do, right? We have to document as we go.
Yeah. So let us know what you think about how you could scale this up. It's a little bit harder sometimes, I think, to scale up. So what is, if you had, all the time, resources, money in the world, how could you take this best practice of having an emergency plan to like the next level? Christine's over sharing some great tips over there.
Yeah, Christine. So inviting people, first responders, a great way to introduce your staff to first responders, and vice versa, to make them aware of who you are and what you have in your collection. And of course, if you can get far enough, what certain items in your collection might be sort of priority list objects. That's really, really important. Kelly says hire a consultant.
Yeah, if you have all the time and money in the world, just have someone else do it.
Hire a consultant, but then also make sure your staff is trained too, right?
Exactly.
Definitely.
So you guys might be emergency kit at each desk. That's another good one too. All the time and resources in the world. Great. So keep them coming. I'll share a little bit about what we thought of into what we thought we could scale this up. Holding annual staff training, all-day training. Wouldn't that be great if every year you could have a just day dedicated to it? Participating with your local cooperative disaster network. So if you are really well prepared, maybe if you're taking it one step further, you're scaling up, maybe you're helping some of your fellow cultural institutions in your area being more prepared as well. You might lend your expertise, lend any resources, supplies, right? That might be something you would do to kind of scale this idea up.
Mm-hmm. And I love that second point too, because a lot of, particularly for our larger institutions that are on this webinar today, a lot of us may not know that we are seen as the local resource, either in information or expertise. And so making sure that we're owning that as experts in our own right, in our own region, to make sure that we can help our smaller institutions in the event of a natural disaster or man-made disaster. We're not even talking about pipes bursting or anything like that, but that would be included, right, in an emergency plan. What do you do in that event? And so ensuring that you all are working within your region together.
Yeah, great. All right. Well, now we're getting into it here. I love all the ideas coming out. This is great.
Yeah,
Um,
Allison says have practice sessions with your staff. So you have trial evacuations, active shooter drills,
mhm.
etc. So you don't wait until it actually happens to try and follow the plan for the first time. Excellent suggestions. Becoming part of a consortium of workshops and or resources.
Yep, check out
Again,
Alliance for Response for that one. Google
yeah.
Alliance for Response, everyone.
Yeah, but making sure, especially in some of our underserved regions
Mhm.
too, recognizing that we have some rural folks on the webinar here, who are those people? And they might not be other museums. They might, again, be your municipal authorities. So inviting those people into your space, hosting them for an event, hosting them for a tour, people love that, and then they get to know you, and you become a priority when you need it the most. So those are important things to keep in mind.
Great. All right, let's try another one. I think you guys are getting it, but let's try another best practice. So again, I'm gonna kind of go through this best practice, write down your ideas about how to scale it down first, and then we'll talk through it a little bit. So the best practice we're gonna look at this time is your storage furniture. All should be powder coated metal, and the same kind of goes for your exhibition furniture too, right? It all needs to be super high quality exhibition furniture, right? So what is this best practice? Let's dive into it. This recommendation actually comes from the National Park Service, which is a reputable source. This is a really good document that I have cited up there. And again, I will share it in the file resource area, but it's also in that Dropbox. So feel free to check that out there if you want to do a little more in-depth reading on this particular one. But you might notice if you look at that sheet that there's some other options for safe materials too, so that might give you some ideas about how to scale. So what purpose does this best practice serve? Basically, it ensures that the artifacts, whether they are in storage or on display, they're not being harmed by anything that's sort of off-gassing or any, acids or any sort of weird materials that might be coming from the shelving or exhibit cases themselves. It allows, again, for that long-term preservation. What are the important details? We're breaking it down. This is sort of a reiteration. We want to protect the artifacts from the shelves themselves. So by seeing what else we can do. So what are your ideas out there?
So Samantha is saying if you only have a limited amount of proper storage furniture, making sure that your high value and high priority items go in it first. So prioritizing your collection when it comes to storage.
That's a great idea. I think that can actually help out with a lot of different areas. So that might be a good thing to do just in general.
Absolutely. Christine says lining shelves with archival materials to protect materials from shelving. If you can't get the top of the line powder coated shelves.
Yes.
Sabrina says barrier layers with ethafoam on metal shelving.
Yes. You guys are getting it. We'll go to our next page here. You already got some of the ideas that we had already come up with, right? Which is the barrier layer, as we talked about. Using primary enclosures. Also, my cat is modeling how to be in a box properly. She's doing a very good job. But, it might not be the best box, but, obviously you want to, trying to talk about the archival materials a little bit different topic in itself, but having things in boxes provides a barrier layer as well. Tiffany, removing any material that causes off-gassing, great. That's also another good one. So if you had all the time and the resources and the money in the world, how would we scale this one up?
Nicole says finding sources for used powder coated metal furniture. That's a good way to scale down, and especially locally. Again, that community resource, that network within your region, city, county, those can be really incredible for something like that. That goes for exhibition furniture as well. So definitely consider that.
Yeah, and to kind of build off of that, there might be, if your friends, again, kind of building into that like consortium idea and who are your friends in the area, maybe there's a big institution out there, we're getting into scaling up, there's a big institution out there who might be getting rid of some of their really nice powder coated metal furniture because they're upgrading, or they're getting rid of their exhibition vitrines because it doesn't fit the next exhibition, and you might be able to get some of those. So that's scaling up for the big institution, and it's scaling down for the little institution. So works on both sides there. I used to work at the Los Angeles County Museum of Art, and they just started a program, I think this week actually, where they are all of their old exhibition vitrines, they're giving them away. So look out for those sort of offers.
Christine says, scaling up, hire Space Saver to build your storage from the ground up. So yeah, all the money and resources in the world. We'll definitely want to hire getting the beautiful white storage furniture, those very clean spaces. Again, when we talk about best practices and we say this is the best practice, we acknowledge that this is on a spectrum. This is, of course, anybody would want something like this, but this is not realistic for so many of us. So thinking of scaling up, this is what it could look like. Samantha says, scaling up, proper enclosures and storage furniture for each type of objects in your collections. Yeah, so having storage specific furniture for different types of materials, different types of collections, enclosures within that type of furniture is absolutely a way of scaling up.
And Tiffany's changing out all of their old wood shelves that are falling apart and buying new ones. Yeah, so you don't have to do it all in one go. That's a really good, important point here, too. You can replace them as you go along. Great. All right, let's do just one more for good measure. I think you guys are getting the theory a little bit here, but let's go through one more example just to make sure it's really solidified in there. So this best practice, it's a really, really tough one. Exhibition should be rotated every 12 weeks. That's impossible, right? Or 3 months. So this recommendation comes from a variety of places for a bunch of different purposes. You might want to change exhibitions every so often for, the visitor services side of things. But in terms of preservation concerns, the AIC and the Smithsonian both use this recommendation. And the reason why they are doing this is because it reduces light exposure for sensitive materials. Light damage is cumulative, it's irreversible. Artifacts are often overexposed when they are on exhibit. So rotating exhibits regularly helps to reduce that light exposure. As another bonus, I'm going to, in the file share area, or again in that Dropbox, I'm going to give you the Sackler-Freer guide to light exposure. Oh, maybe I'm not. Oh, there it is. Yes, so you can check that out as well. It's what you see the image here of. So what are some of the things? So basically, we want to do this so that we can have our light exposure go down and we're not causing long-term damage to our most sensitive materials. So how could we scale this recommendation down?
Samantha's on top of it. She says,
got fast fingers.
I know. Keep your light levels lower than the standards to help stretch out your time frame. Turn lights off when visitors are not in the galleries. Absolutely, yeah. Keeping light levels lower if you can is awesome to stretch that time out. And of course, turning off the lights when visitors aren't in the galleries. We have a lot of times when visitors aren't in the galleries, you could install a motion detection lights in your galleries, and that helps with light exposure over time as well. Christine says curtains and barriers of some kind for super sensitive objects with maybe a label for visitors to explain why we do something like this. That's a great example, and I've seen that done in a lot of especially history museums or museums that have specific restraints on what can and cannot be taken off display. It's kind of fun to see spaces like that. It's a little bit of like, get to see what's behind the curtain. It's fun to experience that. So that's a little bit engaging too for your audience. Sabrina says, rotate out one object in the exhibition at a time. So if you have longer term exhibitions, having a plan to rotate certain objects over time. So spreading out, maybe you have your exhibition up for a few years and you're just planning out rotations within the context of that exhibition helps with light exposure.
Yeah, that's a really good one. I like that idea a lot. So yeah, you guys have gotten a lot of the things that we were talking about. Limit the exposure for just those light sensitive materials. You can have, this kind of ties into what Sabrina was saying about rotating things out one at a time. You can leave those stone things out there for the whole duration, but you're just switching out the things that you know are sensitive and making those light sensitive materials sort of easily changeable. So you can do kind of what Sabrina is mentioning there. So you could do, like with this book exhibition, you could just be flipping the page of the book every once in a while. Or you could maybe have all your works of, if you have like a watercolor exhibit, and you can sort of put stuff in standardized frames so that you can just swap out the image and not have to kind of redo the whole layout every time. Makes things a little bit easier. Something else I've seen I didn't put on here, but just draping your whole exhibition case with a sheet when nobody's in there. That can be helpful as well. You don't have to mess with the lights.
And, it's something we don't think about very often. A lot of our museums are closed to the public on certain days of the week, but staff are actually in the museum working. There's no reason why your lights need to be on in your galleries those days. And so being mindful of conserving, conserving energy, but also making sure we're keeping light levels down across the board. Christine says using enlargements in place where you can. So I'm thinking, works on paper, especially giving people the opportunity to read things, to making, blowing things up, using reproductions of pages. You can have a closed book on display, but a reproduction of the page you want to show. That's a great suggestion there.
So let's scale it up now. If we had all the money in the world, what could we do with this recommendation? I think some of the a lot of time facsimiles, having the reproductions, people think of that as kind of a scaling up because they're expensive, but they don't have to be expensive. You can find some less expensive options there. I know that you have to kind of think about, is it important that you're actually seeing the real thing? But some things to consider. Megan, yes, change the exhibit every 3 months. Yeah, have the staff to be able to do that, right? Get all the time and resources in the world.
Yes. Robust exhibition schedule.
Mm-hmm.
I'm sorry, I'm reading the comments here. Scaling up, getting UV filtering sleeves or covers for every light bulb in your exhibit space and collection storage areas. If books are on display, having multiple copies to trade out, motion lights that are UV safe and or glaze / vitrines that are UV protected. Mm-hmm. Those are all great. Something that Sabrina says, have an exhibition team. So having the staff, having the staff to actually do the things that your museum says you're going to do. The second point on this slide, light exposure for artifacts are tracked. That's something that a lot of museums are not doing, and that really would be a sort of best practices, best case scenario, that you are keeping track in your CMS, how long are objects on display for, and calculating the light exposure and keeping track of that exhibition to exhibition. That would really be a best practices scaling up sort of situation.
Yeah, Nicole's sort of hitting on that too. She's saying UV light data loggers, which would definitely help with this, and I think definitely an example of scaling up, because that's a tough one to achieve. But if we're dreaming big here, we can. All right. Well, those are all great ideas. Those are all of our examples. We're getting close to the end here, but I did want to, on our last slide, of course, give you our contact information if you have other questions later, but also see if you guys have anything out there that we missed. What are some things you might want to talk about scaling here with this group? We have a great group with lots of ideas. So is there anything that you would like to see scaled?
And of course, we are very focused on collections and preservation. That's our background and area of expertise. But this can be applied to all sorts of things. Scaling down and scaling up. This theory of scaling can be taken back and applied for the education teams that you may have, for programming, for whatever sort of ideas that you want to implement in your museum. This is really a theory of practice. And so, please take this information and apply it to other kinds of work, museum work. It doesn't have to just be collections care.
So Travis is asking, how do you track UV light in the cheapest manner? So UV data loggers are sort of expensive, but there's often kind of back into that sort of cohort resource sharing sort of thing. You can often share a light meter between you. You don't necessarily, it would be a really great practice to be constantly logging the UV, but you kind of will get a sense. You might just be able to borrow one from, I'm not sure, Jen, if you guys do lending of those sort of things. I know we do over in Philadelphia. We have like a loaner one that we'll give to people. And you can sort of get a sense of where the UV exposure is. Light, doesn't, you can kind of test it out a couple of different times of the day, a couple on a cloudy day, on a not cloudy day, and you'll sort of get a sense of what the light exposure is. It's a little bit different from the temperature and RH, which is the sun is there, so it doesn't fluctuate that, that as much. And you can often see, the sun is coming in through this area. If you have light UV filters on your windows or your light bulbs, if they are working, you should be reading 0 UV. If they have begun to break down, then you will be getting a little bit of UV in, and that's when you will know that you need to replace them. UV filtering usually lasts about 10 years, but give or take, sometimes if it's in a really high exposure area, it might break down sooner. If it's in a low exposure area, it might last a little longer. But if you can just do something like doing a reading once a year just to make sure your UV filtering is working, I would say that is definitely headed in the right direction.
Yeah, and to echo Sam, Travis, I'm not sure where you are, but we do have an environmental monitoring kit that we lend out to people in Utah, to organizations in Utah. So I would do some Googling around to see if you have a similar office of museum services or cultural agency that does some of this work within your state. That might be an option, or again, those sort of hyper-local regional resource sharing. So another museum, that's a great way to just borrow and see. We have some other folks. Allison says she's read that there are some accurate free light meter apps available for your phone, although she hasn't tried them. I have also not tried them, but
so there's not UV. There's visible light meters that you can get on your phone, but UV you can't. But visible light's also important, so nothing to sneeze at there. You should definitely still look into that. Visible light does still cause problems, but the UV ones are a little bit more high tech in there. Not available for like a free app download, but that is still a good one to be aware of. Sabrina is asking about moving a collection storage area, and I see Megan is helping her out already with some of the collections moves that they did with UMFA. Jen, feel free to jump in if you have any ideas on how to scale that one.
I think we're going to connect those two offline. They're already connected.
Perfect. So. That is sort of an in-depth. I was like, that is sort of an in-depth one. But a good one, maybe for a future iteration.
Yeah. If there's anything for the future you'd like to see too, let us know. that's kind of what we're using our time here for. Evan says, scale question on collections management. I think about cataloging and processing or inventorying digitization with institutions without much staff capacity or access to good software. So your question is how to scale all of these processes, I'm assuming. So I know to answer the cataloging and processing part of this. When I was working at the Utah Museum of Fine Arts, often the only opportunities we had to really fill out or flesh out a record, to gather information on an object, to photograph an object was around exhibitions. And so the system that we had in place was to do this extensive work and build it into our exhibition schedule. That was the way we scaled it, because we didn't have staff capacity to do the whole cataloging processing part of proper collections management from start to finish when we brought in collections, especially at the end of the year when we had a lot of collections coming through the door. And so we scaled it by just sort of building it into an exhibition schedule.
Yeah, and I'll jump in with talking about inventorying in particular. That is one I think about a lot too, is people always, we're always asking how much of your collection is inventoried, and it just seems like this an impossible thing. But I do think you can think about that again in sort of those discrete collections. We had talked about earlier, using your high priority collections, you put those in the nice area, right? Maybe your high priority collections, you do inventory every 5 years or something like that. But you don't necessarily have to inventory everything every single year. You can kind of break it down into little collections and do it in little discrete projects. And I definitely want to piggyback on what Jen was just saying, is doubling up with that too. If you're inventorying already, like, take a picture at the same time, right? Mm-hmm. Doesn't have to be the super high quality picture. An iPhone picture is better than no picture, right? So, seeing where you can double things up and taking it in those little chunks, and not doing the whole thing in one go, but just eventually, over the course of 10 years, you will have inventoried the whole thing section by section. So you can think of it that way.
And I think too, the conversation around scaling is sometimes communicating, especially with collections work, communicating how much time some of this work can take. When you're not cut of the collections cloth, oftentimes people say, well, why is it, just go and inventory this or just process this? It shouldn't be that hard. And so what I have liked to do in the past to sort of set the example is to just do either, spot inventory or just a brief cataloging of one specific collection that has different material types, and then assigning an amount of time that it takes to actually do that work. And that's really helpful information to communicate to your directors, your admin, city officials, whoever you need to report to, and who has a stake in the work that you're doing. You can provide them that information, and that helps with the scaling conversation, because if you can communicate how much work some of this actually is, that might translate into additional funding for staff or resources, or maybe less pressure for you to finish the project that you're working on, in X amount of time. Christine says, yes, the Sam listserv had a great thread about inventory timelines. So that might be something to check out as well, because communicating that, I think, is really important.
Great. Well, I think we're right at our wrap up time here. So we are recording this webinar, so it will be available for you to check out later. And we'll also make sure that you get that Dropbox link sent along as well, so you have access to all of the downloads and all of the other materials. So you can use those worksheets to go forward and scale away. And yeah, let us know. We're kind of at the beginning of this program. We don't have all of our webinars and everything set for the duration of the whole 2 years. So if you have some additional topics that you would like to see us tackle in a webinar format, please send us an email and let us know what else you want to see. Otherwise, I'll go ahead and close today. Thank you, everybody, for your excellent participation, and we really enjoyed this.
Yeah, thank you, everyone. And of course, our contact information is on this last slide. Feel free to reach out to us about the program, the in-person workshops, the webinars, or anything following up.
All right, thanks. Have a great
Thank
weekend,
you.
everyone.